Hey, I think this is working. There we go. I got check marks everywhere. Hey everyone, Chris here with Catherine and Morgan. Welcome.
Hi everyone.
Howdy.
So Christoph can't be with us this go around. He's off doing some stuff for his real day job. But it's great for me to try to meander through the technical challenges of running streaming and also chat with you all. But today we have Morgan, who I met at Clarity. Gosh, what, like
Ooh,
4 years ago?
4 years? Yeah. Time
Yeah,
flies. Ooh.
on top
Wow.
of an office building that like Figma had just moved into at the time, and so it's great to see the travels from here to there or there to here.
Yeah, hi everyone.
So we had a couple of news things, and then wanted to get jamming on. The first thing was the acquisition of Dynaboard. I think this is a really interesting thing. So Figma bought Dynaboard like 2 weeks ago? Yeah, almost exactly 2 weeks ago. And it's fascinating. So Dynaboard does a lot of stuff that I'm sure that if they're listening, they're gonna send me a like, why did you say that message? But it's kind of like Retool. It does a lot of like low code, no code application stuff, and it represents a pretty big stake in the ground for Figma around engineering and trying to be able to take things that you design and make it into code really, really quickly and really easily in a platform that doesn't necessarily require you to understand the underlying code. And I think that's really interesting because it's yet another like move towards a more developer centric focus for one of the biggest tools in our space.
Yeah, I mean, I think, after the Adobe acquisition fell through and their valuation got cut by half, I feel very strongly that Figma's destiny to be the all-encompassing tool for the triumvirate of product, engineering, and design to live in one space. They have to make that work. And I think being, invested by acquiring something like Dynaboard in the engineering space, I think just makes a ton of sense for them. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for them to potentially be a little bit more of a end-to-end tool for people building products with a tool like Dynaboard and some of their AI related initiatives sort of coming together to make that pipeline work.
Yeah, it's interesting because I remember clearly when this first, started with launching FigJam, trying to reach out like more like the product managers and product owners, kind of like the early ideation phase, and now they're going downstream with the developers, obviously with DevMod. And with this, but I actually wonder if that means that, like this old debate, should designer learns to code? Does it mean that finally no, and we're just gonna let AI code for us? It's interesting. I think interesting times at least.
Yeah, didn't you have a quote or something about that? Wasn't it the somebody from NVIDIA?
Oh yeah, actually, hold on. I just want to make sure I name I quote it properly. I think it's the so yeah, and that happened actually last week or 2 weeks ago. So the CEO of Nvidia, and I think anyone's aware of what Nvidia is now. I think in the past it just used to be a gamer thing, and you wanted your graphic card, but now I think everyone's aware. But Jensen Huang said that uh, you actually maybe don't need to learn coding because AI is going to do the work for you. And so his advice is actually not necessarily learning to code, but learning to prompt and learning basically to be an expert or something, to be a domain expert that can use AI to work more efficiently and to basically work in the domain of whatever you're expert of. So very interesting because for the last few years, everyone was like, you have to learn to code, designers need to learn to code, and everyone needs to learn to code. And like I kind of feel like it's kind of being reverted these days. It's like, no, actually learn a job and then you can use AI and prompts to actually do something.
Yeah, there is an interesting sort of uh uh I don't know, debate there, right? Around the idea of, does a designer learn to code, or does a coder learn to like appreciate design? And I think that appreciation side of things is actually kind of an interesting word to use there, right? Because If you think about the level of complexity of some of the stuff we build, especially at scale, it's on the order of like a skyscraper, right? And it's interesting. I was talking to Sean Cheris, the design system lead at Adobe yesterday, and he was using this metaphor of, so if you're building a skyscraper, do you think that that architect understands how that skyscraper gets built? Like, probably at some level they do. They probably don't know exactly like what the tensile strength of every material in the building is, but they understand that like it gets built floor by floor and how everything fits together inside of that. And so while they may not be able to actually build a skyscraper, they have an appreciation for how it gets built, and it informs the work that they do. And I think that he said something that I thought was really interesting, that he blames Flash for a lot of the reasons why there's a lack of appreciation between design and engineering. Where he's like, Flash
Why?
really stunted our development as designers, because it was like, hey, make sure that your screen width is 768 pixels wide, and I'm going to give you this perfect little window into this art gallery that I've built for you, into this little exhibit that exists independent from the medium. And that delta was something that really, I believe the words he used was stunted the growth of the design and engineering collaboration, because you could create something that was basically an art gallery that you could view in a web browser without ever having to use anything about the web browser itself. Um, and so I think that we are still, like, whether or not you believe that that's true, I think we are still in this place where there is not always an appreciation for the artistry that goes into the other side. There's a lot of people that design stuff that have no idea how that gets built, even at a very fundamental level in code. And likewise, there are a bunch of people on the code side and the engineering side that have no idea of the research, thought, and time that goes into the creation of really good design.
Yeah, I
Totally.
mean, yeah, totally. It's funny because like when so I mentor design students, right? And you can really see the ones who try to go beyond the curriculum. Obviously, I mentor design students who learns UX, right? Not development. But you can really see there's this curiosity of people who try to understand how it's done. And then usually they'll ask me, do you have any kind of beginner intro courses into at least HTML, CSS, not asking to learn them any framework, right? But they want to know how things actually are functioning in the real world on the web. And the other ones who like, yeah, okay, here's a Figma link and do your best, and then they'll be like, why is it not like my Figma file? And then you have to maybe go back and forth, explain why it's not possible. But again, there's so much to know. I can understand that it's a bit overwhelming because, like, on one side you have all the methodologies of design, and we keep having new frameworks, so that's on one part, and then have all these, things that happens on the development side and the design system side. So I guess for students today, it must be so hard because like there's everything that you need to know to be able to, you know, get working. Whereas like back in the old days in Flash, you just need to learn how to do some vectors and there you go. And animation, I guess.
Yeah,
I'm
for sure.
nostalgic.
No, I mean, I think that's exactly the challenge, right? Is it's different mediums. And if you're not, I mean, think about how crazy it is that there's not a fundamental understanding of a destination medium often. Um, it's as if you were making a car, but you didn't understand that the car runs on roads. Um, it's kind of a fascinating way of thinking about how we're a fairly unique industry and that there is a pretty big disconnect between the ways that we envision or create intention for a thing and then how that thing is actually built. And there's a lot of repetitiveness to it too, right? When you think about like, I'm gonna go create some really high fidelity comp in Figma, and we talk about this all the time on this show and others. But I'm gonna spend all this time making this really incredible high fidelity Figma comp, and then I'm gonna go make the same thing as a high fidelity website that's actually then consumable. Like how much time we actually spend making that first version of that really high fidelity thing, there's a diminishing return to that. I mean, our job is not to make Figma comps. Our job is to make products. And I think that there's still some of that that gets lost along the way.
Yeah. And I think that's why AI has this interesting opportunity for us as designers and engineering practitioners is that I think it gives an opening for people that traditionally have been so separate and working in very different sort of like environments to actually play in that real space the other side is using. And I think particularly for designers, I think like, you know, the whole designers should they code conversation was never really about like should they know the mechanics of coding. Like at that point in time, it made, you know, it was necessary to be able to then understand more of the, you know, deeper technical underpinnings of how we build and what makes a great product that's necessary, you know, for a designer to know. But I think, you know, with AI you actually get an opportunity to, I think, uh, focus on more of the higher level bits that really matter to understand in terms of building a product and knowing, you know, what it takes to do that well. But the mechanics and, you know, actually, you know, the typing of it, it doesn't matter as much. And I think that's one of the things that AI like really helps take away from the sort of mental overhead of people trying to learn how to build.
Totally. Totally. I also think that there's this huge opportunity in AI to start to think about what new experiences we want to design. And it's fascinating, right? Because like we can any abstraction or any tool, like the thing that you produce with that tool takes on the constraints, right? And so be that Figma, be that React, be that a web component, I think that with AI, a lot of those constraints feel more distant and you have a lot more flexibility in the idea of what you can create. And I also think that there's this really interesting idea about like what interfaces do we create for AI? Like this idea of like on-demand UI is certainly super fascinating, right? So I want to have a result that is AI generated. I understand that value that AI is returning to me is a binary value. So let's make it a toggle and just make that assumption around what that UI control looks like. And there was a really great tweet from Scott Belsky about this. That was all about the idea of an AI enabled future. Designers win because interfaces win. And I had a similar conversation with some folks at Anthropic over the summer, where, you know, my question to them in this big forum in San Francisco that I was a part of was like, hey, what are you guys working on in terms of interfaces? Like, what is the focus of the future of how we work with AI? Because it can't just be chatbots or autocompletes. It has to be something that is like more than that or richer than that. And it was fascinating because a lot of the response that I got was like, well, that's what we expect the community to create is the people that are consuming AI are the ones that are going to come up with these new interfaces. It's not the people that are building the models. It's the people that are consuming it and using it. And I think there is this massive opportunity for us to think about like what new interfaces to AI look like, how they function, and fundamentally like really focus on the design of those experiences.
So I'm not sure it's a hot take here. It's a great start, right? I'm not sure it's a hot take, but
Morgane, you're full of hot takes. It's one of the things I
love. How can I put this? Obviously, I love Générale. I use it on a personal level. I work in the financial industry, so at work it might be a bit more restricted because obviously we need to be very careful. Any mistake can be huge, especially where I work in the corporate investment banking division. But the where we're lucky is basically the data science team sits in the organization, sits with us. So we're kind of part of the digital office. So we've been working with them on projects for quite a long time before Gen AI, where we had regular AI, you know, like with machine learning and everything. And I really feel they kind of like following the same path as design, whereas like a few years ago, everyone wanted like, give me a designer. I want to put I want to sprinkle some UX in my project. And you were like, okay, what do you want to do? An app. Okay, to do what? For whom, etc. And I really feel that now the conversation so the spotlights have shifted away from us, which is I'm a bit jealous about. But like, no, spotlights are on them. And instead of like asking, can you put UX in my project? It's like, can you put AI in my project? And it's kind of like you're asking, okay, what do you want to do? Do you have the data? oh no, but you know, like there's this kind of inflated expectation that AI and Gen AI is going to solve everything. And there's a lot of use cases we work on that's super, super interesting. And it's interesting as well to see like where, you know, UX meet AI on projects. But I find that, you know, like every new technology, there's a lot of inflated expectation. And I wonder how much of that, you know, creates this noise. And maybe it's great because, you know, it gets people interested in everything. But it's honestly, if I relate to what happened when, you know, spotlights were on UX, there was so much inflated expectation and they were just, you know, thinking, let me get a designer and suddenly I'm going to conquer the world. And then you get the designer that is not in the right environment, you know, not with the right tooling or not accessing the right, you know, not accessing users. I kind of wonder like how much of that is kind of translating to, you know, the AI conversation these days. But yeah, that's just my view.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the other side of it too is like what gets budget is still something that is representative of a lot of where the effort and time goes to, right? I mean, you know, you get a bunch of people at a decision maker level that all are getting asked by their peers and by others in the industry, like, what's your AI play? And you know, the ability to build that hype is like, you know, both a wonderful trait of the innovation machine of Silicon Valley and also like a little bit disingenuous about need. But I think that like, look, the attention is great, right? I think that there is a lot that we can do with AI that's super cool. But I agree that it's not like a, you know, let's go put some magic fairy dust over here and have it suddenly revolutionize our product value.
Yeah, it's kind
Yeah,
of
I
like, you know, the
mean,
bandwagon effect. Yeah, oh, go ahead, Catherine.
oh no, I was just gonna say I think you know in technology hype cycles are eternal. There will always be a new technology that everyone rushes to, tries to figure out how to immediately inject value into their products with, and you know oftentimes like the hype dies at some point, and you know the long scale building of the value into the products that actually need it, that actually makes sense for having you know this new technology like AI. I think you know we're in that little peak right now, but I think you know it's going to take a while to really see like the fruits of you know how transformative this actually is. So that's where we're at.
Yeah, I was I was reminiscing yesterday again with like another person that has been around tech since their early years um about the first website that I created. So the first website I created, I think that I was in middle school and like maybe like grade 7 or grade 8 and I did it in Notepad in like Windows 95. Um and I remember like that really rudimentary experience of like opening up Notepad, writing like a bracket and then HTML and then a closing bracket, like writing the actual tags of everything and, you know, messing up my syntax, but getting like, you know, my marquee tag and my blink tag to make some gaudy, awful thing that flashed at you, you know, 40 times a minute inside of Netscape. And like that experience was awful relative to the experience that we have today of how we create websites. Um, and I think about that as like, you know, two things struck me. First of all, like all of a sudden I was like, holy cow, I'm like old guard of web, which feels weird. But then the second side of it is like these experiences are going to improve. The way we work with this stuff is going to improve. And we're going to go from like, you know, a notepad file on a Windows desktop to a decoupled CMS with a JavaScript framework powering the front end. There's going to be that similar transition inside of AI at some point. And it's going to take years, but like ultimately what we're seeing now isn't necessarily what this fundamentally looks like in the future.
Yeah, I feel like it's really like coming back to that quote from NVIDIA CEO about, you know, learn to be an expert in the domain. I feel like, yes, once, we out of the peak of the hype, what really matters is how people are going to use it for their real need, their real use case in the real world. And obviously the people who will be able to make something useful of it are the ones who actually have an existing need. Maybe they didn't had the proper tool to do it before, they didn't have AI to help, and this is basically shifting how they can do their job. Kind of like, I like to joke how, it's a bit like probably before Excel, people had to, accountants used to input numbers manually. And I was watching this documentary where this guy was like, the first time I presented Excel, I mean, it wasn't Excel back in the days, like just, something to compute numbers, right? To an
It
accountant,
was like
their
Lotus
hands,
123 back in the day, right?
yeah, like their hands started shaking because they really realized, how it's going to change entirely how they do their job. Maybe a bit like Figma, how we used to design completely differently in the past. And now it's like one file online and you can bring in people. So that has shifted how we work. And obviously, Gen AI is yet, I guess, another tool, but obviously very powerful one, but also a very dangerous one because I don't think any other tools would hallucinate numbers and results. So yeah, again, very interesting times these days.
Yeah. Catherine, you were talking also about what's going on with some of the other like software vendors in this space as well.
Oh yeah. So I have never shared a screen on here, so let me see if I can get this to work, because it's better with visuals. Oh, it probably won't.
I
Anyway,
can do it.
I'll just
I
speak
think.
to it. Yeah.
Whoa. There we go. Can you all see that?
Yep.
Yeah. So what I wanted to just share real quick is, so one of the ideas that has come up a lot recently in the AI and particularly like AI plus design system space is this idea of dynamic or generative UI. And so I think one of the things that's interesting is the idea of, when we as design system designers or UI designers and engineers think about building design systems, oftentimes like you think of the end consumer of this being like a person in your organization that's using this to build your products. And I think one of the things that has been positive is, what if there was an opportunity for the AI at the point of usage of someone using a product that is imbued with AI, being able to compose and put together the pieces of a design system into like a usable interface, for the particular thing that they're asking about, right? And today a lot of what working with AI looks like is just talking with a chat and just getting text back. And so one of the things that was interesting over the last couple of weeks that came out was this new AI SDK from Vercel, which is a hosting platform for web applications, stuff like that. And their tooling is basically a way for you as like a product maker to be able to specify, hey, there's this whole suite of interfaces and UI that can be used in certain situations. Take this and appropriately use it for certain answers that you may give, and compose it into something that can be used for by the person asking some of these questions. And so I think one of the things that's just interesting for us as design systems designers is like now we have an opportunity, I think, to like not just design the sort of standard text-based interfaces, but we can take all of our skills in building design systems for people into building it in such a way that an AI can use for like AI use cases. So I think this is interesting, and I think there's something here that kind of lends itself to that idea that if you are working on and controlling the interface of how people interact with AI, you're in a stronger position. I think this is one of the things that design systems designers can spend more time on in the near future, because how you interact with AI is so limited right now. There's just so much opportunity to do interesting things with tools like this now in place.
Yeah, it's interesting. Knapsack leans really heavily on Vercel for a lot of the stuff that we've built in our app, and so being able to implement a lot of this stuff, it's a big shortcut for us. And the ability to have it be an SDK to make our own experiences, like talking about interface design, right? Like this gives us a lot of flexibility to build those things.
Totally.
Um,
There's
go ahead.
continue.
Sorry.
No, I was just saying, I think there's
I think there's a stream delay.
there's a very combinatorial and flexible future for how like UIs get put together. I think this is just like the first step towards that.
So jumping over to another topic real quick, I wanted to give a shout out to the folks up in Seattle. They had their first design system meetup. We sponsored, but we definitely weren't the ones that were leading it. So quick shout to Peng, Jesse, Adam, and the rest of the crew up there. Thanks for putting together a great event. I'm loving seeing these start to happen. We have other ones planned in New York, Portland, Austin, San Diego, and others. Just to show a super fun photo real quick. So we got like 40 people to come to event number 1 in West Seattle. So everybody took some time out of their day, showed up, talked. There were folks from lots of different big Seattle tech companies there. And it was great to see so much interest in the design system. That's Adam over there on the right taking the photo. But it was so great to see this community starting to like come back, flourish, blossom. And likewise, we just coming off of some time in New York at the Design Systems Leadership Summit. That is one of the Knapsack events there, but it was awesome. We had folks from like leaders of big financial companies, communications companies, folks from Twitch and Amazon there and elsewhere, all talking about design systems and the strategic relevance of these things. And I continue to say that our biggest thing that we need to come together on as a community is trying to figure out how to get the people that ultimately are making strategic decisions about the future of design and engineering at their companies to value a systems-based approach. And it's awesome to see a bunch of people in a room that are from all different walks of life that all have that strategic decision-making power being like, yes, this is the way that we want to go forward. So we're hosting another one of these in New York later this month on the 28th. We're also then going to take it on the road, go out to San Francisco April 18th. And so if you're interested in attending, please apply, come hang out with us. They're super fun.
I'll be there in San Francisco for the next one. So excited to see everyone that ends up joining.
And Morgan, I'm going to get one in London one of these days. I promise.
I was going to say in London. Yeah, but honestly, I have to say I got to tons of different events, right? And I did one on Monday on customer experience, but I feel like my favorite events are design system because I just feel like the community is super supportive and the thing we work on are so relevant because when you work on design system, it's not just the technical part of thing. It kind of implies, working how we change how we work. And that leads to so many interesting aspects. And I don't think there's a lot of roles in a company where you can impact so much. And obviously, it's kind of in disguise because very often you start with a design system for really practical reasons. But it's all along the way that when you have it, then you start to think more systematically about your products, your services. And then obviously, then you realize, oh, you're struggling because not everyone's on board, and sometimes you can face a bit of resistance. So it's kind of like this therapeutic bubble that we're all in. So yeah, I would definitely recommend going if you can to these kind of events.
And I also want to just point out too that like there's lots of different experience levels in events like this. And so getting to see people that are on, their first round or first implementation of design systems interact with people that are on round like 2 or 3. That's where a lot of magic moments happen, right? And I think that a lot of people have a really similar journey, right? This idea of the first design system you build, like you're struggling for funding, you're struggling for relevancy, you're struggling for that adoption. Everything feels like so Sisyphusian and uphill and difficult. And then I was talking again earlier this week to someone that is on their third implementation now of their design system. And they're like, pretty much no friction anymore. Like people get the idea of how this works and they want it. And there is like a point where like, you've been rolling that boulder uphill for so long. Suddenly you look up and the boulder is like rolling without you. So that's there. It just takes some time to get to. And watching people's like sense of relief that there is this valley that they get to on the other side of that mountain. It's palpable when you get those kinds of interactions.
Yeah, it's funny. I actually call it the circle of grief. I don't know if it's like first there's 5 steps. So I can't remember all of the steps from the back of my mind, but when you get a design system at the beginning, and when you want people to use it, first they are in anger. They're like, no, that's not for me. And then they carry on, they start to bargain, or maybe I'll use it, but I only take what I want, or like I change the color. And then they get depressed and they're like, oh, this is the death of creativity, these kind of things. But then there's the end of the circle where you realize that actually this is a super powerful tool and you can be doing so much more, because if you're a designer or if you have a developer, your goal is not to recreate always the same UI styles over and over again. And you can actually start doing things that actually would bring more value to your work, such as, for example, for a designer, spending more time with doing research and thinking about problems instead, again, tweaking stuff in a design tool. But yeah, it's been an interesting journey. Definitely.
Yeah, and I've always touted you, Morgan, as someone that's like kind of living in that valley. Like
Oh.
you've sort of reached the promised land in so many ways. And I know that we've had this conversation a couple of times over the past few years, but I really do feel like a lot of the strategies that you've employed to get a design system to be more than just a product, but to actually get it to be a way of working, is really representative of a lot of like end states for or end goals for a lot of the organizations I talk to. And I think it's worth like chatting about that for a minute, because I think what you have built is something that's really special, where you have a design system that, first of all, has no real brand or name associated with it that's different than the way of working at the company. And secondly, you're in this place where like you're living in a place that is truly democratized. That you have, I think you've even mentioned like you have salespeople that build stuff using the design system, and
That's incredible.
that future is really incredible. Where like you don't have to be a professional coder or a professional designer to make something. And I think that's an interesting story about what that looks like and a little bit about how you got there.
Yeah, oof. It's a long journey. And I can tell you at the beginning, we were not aware that it was going to change how we work. As I said, I think it started very practically, actually on the dev side, because again, we have, so especially in my industry, we have a lot of niche products. So we tend to have, contrary to B2C, where you have a product services, a lot of customers, we have many, many product services, sometimes just a couple, but they need to be serviced, right? And so it was very apparent that we kept reinventing the wheel and that we needed something to, well, not do that. So back then, there were a lot of framework that we could reuse, like Bootstrap, obviously. But it's only when we started saying, okay, now we want to be more, mindful about how we use a color, how we compose, a layout, and we want the same experience if it's the same use case, right? Across all services. And this is, like talking about the circle of grief, where we had people who were a bit upset because suddenly they had to follow those guidelines, whereas before they were like free. And so we had people living over this kind of griefs, I guess. And I think for a while there was this kind of, so are we just kind of not reinventing the wheel, but like just using the same patterns for the same things? And I think what happened at the end is basically that has allowed us to shift the conversation. So instead of always recreating stuff in UI tools, as I said earlier, that allowed us to really think, okay, is that the right pattern to apply? how do you know if it's the right pattern? If the only way to know is you actually do some research and actually know your customer. And so that really allows us, because like now what we say to project is, okay, we have a design system, the buttons, tables, we have it. If you have a super vanilla use case, if all what you need is filters and table, we have patterns for that. So take it, you don't need us. But if suddenly you want to do some, perform some actions, or you have, more complex UX need, then you probably need to work with a designer. And it's a way actually for people also to understand, because the tool that we built, around a design system can be accessed by everyone internally. So I was just like, okay, have a look. That's so patterns. This is the layout. If that's enough for you, then happy days. But then once you start to have more complex needs, probably you should, then involve a designer in the thinking and the scoping of things. So I feel like this kind of helped actually clarify that designers are not just here to make pretty pictures, because now with a design system, you can make a very pretty picture, but that works terribly awfully. And yeah, I think this really helped. And in terms of plateau, I think what we're really excited about this year is that after thinking about patterns such as filters, tables, results, these kind of things, we've kind of trying to bring this mindset a bit further, because once you've done, again, cards, buttons, all this, where do you stop? That's always the question I ask. Because honestly, if there's this experience of picking a client, we want the same experience across, our services, or like placing a trade, or like all those more businessy, meaty stuff. We also want to patternize them. And so for a while, we've been trying, but it's very difficult because that implies domain expert knowledge, as Hansen once said. And so, yeah, this is where we are currently. And yeah, that really keeps us busy.
I bet. Catherine, does that mirror your experience at all when you were at DoorDash?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think, you spend a lot of time in the beginning trying to like both set your own foundations in like the actual like system itself, but then also setting the foundations in the organization and how they think of what it is that you're doing, with design systems, and like building both that grounds up culture of, how do you think about building as like a designer engineer with all these sort of patterns and ideas that we've now like brought in sort of productized way to you, as well as like on a higher level with like the design and engineering leadership. Like, how do you make sure that you're incorporating this idea of reuse and a shared common infrastructure that you all put in investment and time into, as well as pull out value from for your engineers. How do you like make that core into how you think as an engineering leader and how you direct your teams to spend their time and use what's available? And so I think there's a lot of like similarities in terms of that life cycle. Like, how do you evolve from those early days to those later days? And there are different challenges in both sides, but I definitely think there's a lot of like power that comes with being at that later stage, because then you can think about more of the core and integral reasons why you came into building a design system in the first place, versus needing to do the work of really selling and embedding it into like your culture.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I think that there's a story there that's simultaneously really simple and really complex. And the really simple part of it is you can make a lot of apps with some cards, some buttons, and some form fields. And so the exposure of that to anybody being able to work with it, it's not like the world's highest bar, right? There's a lot of stuff that you can do with very simple pieces of UI. But then there's also the idea about like, how do people actually, the complex part, which is like, how do you actually get a model where people consider that as not just possible, but the first place they should turn when they go to build something. And I think that, again, the enablement of a design system from a technology standpoint, yeah, there's complexity there. But again, the bar isn't really all that high. The much, much harder thing is like, how do you get it to be the way of working?
Yeah, and I can definitely tell you, when we do presentation of design systems, especially to higher ups and management, we do not insist on like the buttons. I know everyone's so passionate about buttons in the design system space. But what we show instead are usually like the most substantial components, such a date picker, because a date picker seems easy, but everyone knows it's not. Anyone working in design system space knows it's not. Even less easier than what it seems to be in the financial space, because then you have to really to think about, market days, presets, things like that. How do you show numbers across different regions? So, there's the American date format, there's the European, German date format, French date format. So all this is different. And so, yeah, usually that rings a bell because they may have been struggling with a date picker in their personal life. And like when you add on the complexity and needs of the financial markets, then now they get it why we spend so much time building our own picker, whereas a button, and who needs a button? Who needs a team to build a button? I think that's what Dan Moll says in his conference. And yeah, that's a fair point.
So getting back to kind of like what you've been working on, you talked about this future where there's this extension into these other areas of the design system. What about that is keeping you so busy? And maybe if it's okay to share, talk a little bit about like what that end state vision really is there. Because I've always been curious, like just as some context, like, look, we've known each other a while now, and every single time we talk, you've gotten like this next milestone that you've been able to accomplish. And I always love asking you, like, what's the future hold? Because I'm gonna have this conversation again with you in a year, and you're gonna be like, oh yeah, we did that thing, and now this is the next thing. And so I'm kind of curious, like, what is it that you're going for with this current initiative, and what do you see as the future?
Yeah, well, I guess shout out to the team, because all this is, again, in hindsight, it's easy to tell the story, although we're right in the middle of trying things here. But I guess it all comes to the fact that, people understanding the need of using a design system and trying to, reuse this way of thinking systematically. There was this need in this team to, when they work on their own products, to align with other designers. And so very often they'll be like, is anyone working on that specific use case? Or has anyone, worked on that? And so we have actually a help channel where anyone can ask this question. And so for a long time, we were like, okay, this is the only way we managed to share this information, because there's been so many ideas, such as, for example, people will be like, what about, filling a table with all the patterns and everyone will fill it from time to time? I can tell you that doesn't work because we get busy. Or another way we've been trying to do is like every time we had a new journal, because again, in the team, and maybe I should have mentioned that first, we are the same design team covering the whole of the investment banking division. So we have access to all the designs. So everyone in the team can see everything. But there's so much done that it's very hard to dig into, all the screens to find anything, especially now in Figma.
Signal to noise becomes a big problem.
Yeah, because in Figma, the files, you have to open everything. You have to wait 1 minute for those things to load. So do you even, you don't have time to do that, except when you're a new journal. And so very often new journals will be like, oh, let me index everything and I'll do a study. But that's actually for them. And that's something that, doesn't live through time, because it can, it doesn't, it can become irrelevant very quickly. So we were kind of trying all these things and it wasn't not really working. And actually, at the end of the day, the only way we managed to, so it works now on 2 patterns that we tried, business pattern, is actually the designer who has the most domain knowledge, kind of coming back to the CEO quote, but yeah, honestly, he's smart, Sorry, I'm making fun of myself here. But it is the designer who actually has the most domain knowledge working on that business pattern that needs to document it. Because if it's someone else, it's kind of you're wasting, your time, and you have this proxy. But again, you have to get all this knowledge from the person who worked on it. So the way we've been trying now to document business patterns, so for example, trading patterns, audit patterns, or these kind of things, is actually collecting the domain knowledge that everyone in the team has accumulated and put in place more like a framework to help them contribute. So basically, the design system council that we have is here to guide them into, how do you document it properly? How do you write stuff? And maybe they will take over, to finalize some edge cases and things like that to make it sure it's properly documented and everything, because it's hard to document. But yeah, so far that's what we've been trying. And so we are actually, in the coming weeks and months, gonna try to have more contributors and see how that works. And I hope, I will see, I'll come back in a few months, that this time we'll be able to document. Because yeah, we it's frustrating. We have this knowledge, we've worked on things, but they sit at the product level. And so again, how do you systematize that at scale? That's that's what we're really interested in at the moment.
I love the business patterns concept associated with it. Like there's almost this like historical like library / knowledge management around how things work that is equally important from a design perspective as like the code that powers a button. um and so the interesting part to me is like as you move forward with these business level patterns and start to think about how that impacts um product, but also how it impacts things systematically across the organization, I think that's going to have like really far reaching consequences. It's like sometimes we talk about probably not as often as we should, but sometimes we talk about the idea of like put your build tools in your design system, put your linters in your design system, put all of these other different things that represent not just the design system itself, but how you actually get the design system to work inside of your design system. And now what you're talking about is don't just put the things that represent product design in your design system, put the things in the design system that get product design to actually be effective and work at like a human business process level. And that's super cool.
And interesting.
Very much.
And
Yeah.
and brings, I guess, interest from, because like a lot of people say, yeah, we have to think like the business, we have to justify business value. I really feel like we were lucky that we were starting to work on this, because definitely when we present these days, that's definitely what we focus on. Design system, not like a technical asset, but, and again, you could argue, is those patterns part of a design system? I don't know. But it definitely gets people interested. And also for them, it's easy to understand that, for example, if you want to design an audit trail, a FOI check, which is a security, let's say a security process, we don't want to have it differently depending on the application. We want the same for clients or users. So it's good for the client users, it's good for the budget. And being able to place yourself at that center, saying, okay, we have the IP, we have the knowledge, we own these things, I think really helps, articulate the fact that you do have business value, and this is valuable because the next application that needs this kind of patterns, we know how to do it, we know what works, and we can do it very efficiently with them. But yeah, again, I mean, you can only do that when you reach, the plateau after all the grief cycle and everything. But I have to say, again, I think you can run in parallel. You can work on your tokens and have, I don't know, if you really, if your product centered on maps, for example, then, have patterns around maps, things that we don't have because we don't have maps in our financial tools. But, again, this starts to be, something that is specific to you, that could be your IP.
So interesting.
Totally.
Hey, for those listening, feel free to throw questions in the chat. Want to make sure that Morgan and the rest of us get a chance to answer the stuff that you care about. Until then, just to keep going. When you think about those business patterns, there's kind of two things that come to mind. First of all, like the representation of those things, especially from like a compliance and content standpoint, are really interesting, right? So, for example, privacy law compliance across like large systems of apps. There's a lot of content for that has to be legally approved, and then that experience, like consistency, is a legal requirement for it. In terms of how that privacy policy rolls out and is applied to every product in say a big like entertainment brand ecosystem or something like that. And then likewise, there's a bunch of things with like modular content and the ability to have reusable bits of content that also represent a really common business problem that is really well suited for a design system. But I also think that we're somewhat in danger of like what Dan Mall calls like creating the Figma palace, where like you overload your Figma file, and it starts to look a lot more like a CMS than a Figma file. And so, is there a point where like we should say, "Stop! This doesn't belong in the design system"?
Ooh, that's so interesting. Actually, I can tell you from my experience that when we started working on business patterns, so actually none of our business pattern sit in Figma. They sit in in the documentation tool that we have. And we had a debate whether to illustrate those, should we illustrate them using high fidelity examples, and we ended up saying no, we actually need to scale down, and we're only using wireframe level illustrations because we don't want people to focus on the UI aspect of things. We want them to focus on the logic of the patterns, and also because UI wise we know that the design system is going to keep evolving. um, but yeah, I guess the temptation is to use Figma because all designers know how to use Figma and everything. And I've been fighting in the team for my designers not to use Figma when they present presentations, because then they're the only one who can actually update and make this presentation. But yeah, tooling is definitely difficult, and the temptation is to do everything in Figma because it's so easy to use for designers. But I have to say, and I'm sure people know, it's not that easy to use for other stakeholders. So we have to be mindful. I mean, if you want that thing to spread, it shouldn't sit only in a design tool.
Yeah,
So
I
I
think
hope
it
it's
has
yeah.
to. Yeah, I mean, I agree in that. I think it has to sit closest to where like the community that it makes sense for that particular pattern to be like distributed and reused in like lives. And so like for us, like the way that we thought about it at DoorDash was there are like people and owners of systems that are subsystems of like the broader design system, and being able to like have that both as like a layer of abstraction for that question of should this live in the broader design system. In a lot of cases it does. It should be something that is specific to a particular product domain. And having both someone on our team that like really can connect it back to the broader design system, as well as like an owner like within like a particular product area, to be able to say like, hey, we're collaborating on this subsystem together, we're helping determine what lives here versus what lives in the broader design system. That gives an opportunity to be able to say like it's best used and most useful for like the particular area that it makes sense in this space, so let's put it here. And I think that's a good way for like larger design systems to really like answer that question.
I, it's interesting because when we talk about the tooling aspect of it versus the more philosophical conceptual aspect of it, like it does feel like there's somewhat of a misalignment, right? Where we basically say we want to have these design tools that are an abstraction that allow us to really rapidly iterate through things. And like it's easy, right? And I agree with that. And then we have all these documentation systems that like we don't have time to maintain. And then we have all these different like end states that we look at that say like, yeah, we want to be able to have this like highly democratized way of building that ultimately represents patterns, and those patterns should live exactly where they need to and no further. And there's a lot of complexity to that. And I think that Catherine, when you were talking about sort of that systems of systems approach and where do things live, like there probably is some sort of experience that represents a catalog of how these different systems and tools interact that um I think would be an interesting thing to like write about or draw. Um because there is so much complexity in this. And I wonder if there's like a standard model that exists. And I read Brad's post about it's like a lot of the structural ideas of systems and stuff like that. But it's still not really, it's still a little bit too philosophical. It's not concrete enough to be grounded in a single system. And so I want to see like what does the like, state graph look like for
Mm-hmm.
my design system.
Yeah, what is the practical working model of how systems of systems actually get used in an organization?
It's probably too big for a human to like fit it in their brain, I think is the hard part.
Yeah, and I wonder how much of that depends on how the organization is organized. It's kind of we say, depending on the methodology, it always depends on your structure and how things are, the culture, and the organization. So yeah, I remember actually asking Brad a few. I had clarity when we met, because we were really debating: should we have only one design system for the whole company, or should we have multiple? And so I was like, "Oh yeah, I can ask the expert. He's there." And the thing what he said at the end was like, very often it's a decision that is coming from how the organization is organized, and not so much about someone overthinking how things are. Um, Maybe like to give you an example in my organization, we actually have two main design systems. So one for retail and one for the corporate investment banking world, which is also used for employee because a lot of the use cases are the same. So we need compact, screens to perform professional tasks. And retail wise, actually, we have several because we have several brands. Would it be possible to just have one for everyone? I think that's really, really difficult to, because again, our needs are so different, that I think everything we would try would be suddenly so complicated in terms of governance and everything. But yeah, so that's what we ended up deciding for us. But for other companies, maybe they are able to have only one, because their maybe targets and their market are more like, I would say, narrower than what we cover. So yeah, again, I think it really depends on the organization.
Yeah, we all live Conway's Law so deeply in the world of design systems, right? Like how people communicate and how people work and like the organizational communication flows and structures, almost always the design system that is right mirrors that in some meaningful way. Awesome. Well, Morgan, it's been so great to have you. Like, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it. Catherine, thanks for co-hosting as always. Christoph, it was great to fill in for you. And thanks so much for taking the time to chat and telling us about the stuff you're working on.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. It's
That's
always very
awesome.
exciting to be in such a nice bubble of therapeutic experience that we share together.
We can all share our cycles of grief, right?
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, hey everybody, this has been the Design Systems Field Guide. Super fun hanging out with y'all. Talk again soon.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.